So welcome everybody. Thanks so much for coming to join us this afternoon for a talk on North of Ordinary, why the future of AI is being built up here. We'll explore what makes Manchester a global powerhouse for AI and tech innovation in general. It's a city with a thriving tech ecosystem and global momentum. I'm joined with some incredible guests, but I'll let them give a bit of an intro to themselves and their respective organizations.
Great, thanks, Troy. Hi, I'm Ed Thompson. I'm a senior investment manager with the Greater Manchester Investment Fund. We provide early stage funding to businesses from as little as £20,000 all the way up to 5 million, helping them, grow in Manchester.
Hi everyone, I'm Jack Warren, Venture Associate and Head of Investor Relations at EHE. Split my role between managing our existing pool of investors as well as supporting our portfolio companies once we invest.
Hello everyone, I'm Alex, the Business Development Manager for Creative, Digital and Technology at MIDAS. We are Greater Manchester's inward investment and economic development agency, working alongside the GMCA to try and increase the investment into the city region and the 10 boroughs around Manchester.
Thanks guys. So to kick things off, to look at the bigger picture, why is Manchester specifically becoming a magnet for AI startups and tech innovation in general? And what are the city's major strengths right now?
It's a really good question. I mean, the tech ecosystem in Manchester has matured a lot over, I've been up here since 2018, but it's matured a lot recently. And through that, you're starting to see it become a great place to start an AI business. Manchester is, I think it's 1-2 years in a row, the best AI ecosystem, or the most ready AI city. It's got the biggest tech and AI cluster outside of London. So it's, and a lot of that is built on the maturing market. You've got access to universities where there's some really interesting research and technology going on, and you've got a really good workforce, which makes it a real good hotbed to and why you're seeing that growth rapidly.
Entrepreneurship's a lot more accessible now, and it empowers people to become founders and start businesses. The universities play a big role. Academic founders, very defensible people, PhD students that want to turn their ideas into businesses. And from an investor perspective, that's very credible, because we want people that are defensible, that are unique, that have great ideas that other people can't achieve. So just having those academic founders starting businesses is a great platform for investors to kind of build around.
Yeah, I think collaborations is really important as well in Manchester. You look at things like Sister or Dish in the city centre, where you've got obviously Sister part of the Renault building, part of Sister, the biggest European city centre investment project in Europe. That is a combination of the university and Bruntwood SciTech, offering stuff like free office space for founders for 6 months to get started in the city centre and build a network, etc. And then go on stuff like Dish, where you've got Lancaster University, GCHQ, other partners, again providing a space and a platform for founders to come in, get into the network in the city centre, get investment, and then scale from there. And to Ed's point, also talent. We have the most diverse array of AI workforce in the UK now. So no matter what kind of AI you're working with, no matter what kind of models you're building, you can find the talent for it in Manchester. So stuff like that.
Yeah, completely, Alex. I think you've kind of just touched on the point here, but it's clear there's a momentum in the ecosystem currently. I think the interconnectedness between the ecosystem is certainly strengthening in terms of where different organizations can work together to actually help startups in all capacities, not just in the AI space. But how are we making that story travel internationally? Alex, you're often the first port of call for companies looking to scale or relocate to the UK, Manchester specifically. How is Manchester positioning itself globally to attract AI and tech companies? And how are they deciding between sort of regional hubs in the UK or maybe across Europe, and what makes Manchester special?
So there's two pieces to that. The first is, how do we get that message out there? We literally go. I know Heather here from the growth companies is always saying that my out of office is on, because we're always going in market to take the messages that everyone has just said here about why Manchester is such a good place to grow. Take that to the people in the market. One example of that is we were recently in Austin, Texas, with the mayor. And it does help having probably one of the most recognizable political figures in the UK in the same building as you and on your doorstep. But going out there in these big missions, taking companies that have grown in Manchester and helping them spread that message abroad, getting in front of the right people. I know that was a point made in the last panel about how important it's just go meet the right people, get in front of them, but it's similar to inward investment. When we went out into Austin, we met with people like Dell, Cloud Imperium Games, big Austin-based companies that are also working in AI. It's about making those relationships, making the points that have just been made on the panel, and then bringing them to Manchester to see it for themselves. So that's one part of it. And I think also with help from organisations like Marketing Manchester, who work within the MIDAS office, getting that message out into international markets through their press, through their social media channels, etc. And against that point that the chap on the last panel made, was it 7 times you need to be seen by someone to make an impression? I think we kind of do that as well, but in market as opposed to investors. And I think Manchester's very good at that because it always has a very established global brand, but now we have to kind of tailor that message as to why, okay, the Industrial Revolution, etc., was the last thing we sort of led the frontiers on. Now the AI revolution is where we're pushing forward as well.
Yeah, completely. It's clear that we've got a lot of international interest, but also certainly a lot of regional-based deal flow in the AI space specifically. So, Jack, what's actually the AI deal flow look like across the region right now? And when you're looking at founders, sort of what makes somebody stand out in this market?
AI is the hot topic right now. There's a high proportion of startups are AI, whether it's an AI first business building something really unique, defensible, or just applying AI within a sector to improve products and services within that sector. So you're going to see AI touch most decks that you see now. And the challenge you've got is AI is touching so many sectors. So in terms of finding investors in the north, you've got a lot of early stage investors, but they all have their own thesis. So some might be life science, some might be health, some might be B2B SaaS. So there is a challenge at the moment kind of matching investors to the right business because they're on the fringes of lots of different investment theses. And then you've got this extra complexity where you've got regional investments where people can only invest in the Liverpool region or the Manchester region. So you've kind of just got to navigate the fringes of where founders are based and what sectors they're touching. So that's one challenge. But there is not a shortage of founders in AI. People are more empowered to set up businesses. Innovate UK plays a big role in kind of supporting them and then bringing those innovations to life. So whilst there's a huge amount of opportunities and deal flow, it's the challenge is just kind of finding and matchmaking those investors so that it serves as many founders as possible.
Yeah, completely. We've certainly seen that from an EHG perspective in terms of if you want to differentiate between a few different things when it comes to AI enablement. I guess that's our fun thesis, and we'll look at sort of ChatGPT wraparounds and sort of software solutions, but also then proprietary tech that we can sort of build from the ground up. And that's why our venture studio model becomes really interesting because we can use that as a defensibility case. And we'll explain a little bit more about the venture studio shortly. Going back to the shape of the ecosystem, it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about what's driving that from a policy side. So Ed, how intentional has the growth of AI and tech in general been at a city region level, and what role is GMCA playing in establishing Manchester as a long-term tech and global innovation hub?
Yeah, so I mean, there's two parts to that question or answer, I guess. On the kind of venture side, which I sit in, and then more on a policy side. I'll come back to the venture side, but on the policy side, there's, the combined authorities taken the approach that AI is going to be essential to helping the city grow in the future and trying to take a long-term view on that. Recently, where we're now July, so last month, the sort of initial phase of a scope of work, for enough of words, was approved, and that's around. I think it's called the GMAI Demonstrator City. And what does that even mean? And what it's essentially about is making sure that Manchester is set up to benefit from AI over the long term. So it's around making sure the right ecosystem is there to help SMEs grow. It's about making sure the right infrastructure is there. So AI takes a huge amount of computing power does Manchester have the right amount of computing power? And it's about skills as well. So making sure that people coming out of the universities and the schools have the right skills to benefit from AI, utilize AI, and help again drive that value in the region. Because otherwise Manchester will lose its crown as the best cluster outside of London, and it will be very rapidly overtaken by other cities. And that's on the policy side. From the venture side, which I sit in on the investment fund, so we are quite thesis driven. We're geographically limited to Manchester and Greater Manchester, but our thesis is, we're investing in frontier sectors around low carbon, advanced manufacturing, life sciences, albeit another fund, external fund manages our investments for us in that, and within tech as well. So what we're seeing on the venture fund side is we're sort of doubling down on where AI can help those frontier sectors. So we're starting to see businesses that are, we class as advanced manufacturing, but actually they are an AI business. But you'll see where the end user applications of those businesses are within advanced manufacturing. We're starting to see more legacy businesses that are taking funding and utilizing funding from us to automate their workforces. And those are long-standing, traditional, quite often father-son type businesses based in the outskirts of Oldham and Rochdale, which on the face of it you wouldn't think would have a need for AI, but we're starting to see it sort of creep into all areas of Greater Manchester. And what it means is, within tech as well, for an institution such as the CA, enterprise SaaS has become more harder for us to invest in, because the impact within Greater Manchester, and that's the thesis we look for, everything has to deliver something to Greater Manchester, is harder to prove. But when you start looking at things like cyber security, you only have to read the news and look at the number of attacks there are, and thankfully more and more are being prevented. So areas like cyber and where AI can help support those is going to become more important. So we are focusing our efforts within those sort of areas of the market, those sectors. Now, we are only a co-investor, so when we look at equity deals, we don't typically do any more than half a round. So we need that ecosystem and co-investors, to be there as well. We can't do it all on our own. And thankfully, since I've been up here, I've seen that ecosystem grow rapidly and for the better. And I think what's been great is that Manchester's been fantastic at building the foundations, to help businesses at an early stage. And we're starting to see that there's more accelerators now than there's ever been. There's more tech transfer units than there's ever been. There's more facilitators than there's ever been. And there's actually more funds now than there's ever been. And, and that's inevitably going to end up with some cracking businesses being built here. And we just, I guess, got to wait around and see where they come from.
No, thanks, Ed. I think on the co-investment point, I think something that we experience with from an EHE context is that we want to co-invest to de-risk the opportunity, but to also rely on your sector expertise in different ways. So although we only write a fairly small check in the grand scheme of things, we can happily lead on the tech angle from Tech DD, because we can do that in-house with our sort of tech team, and then sort of other our partners that we've been able to co-invest with. That's been a de-risker for sort of more capital inflows into the ecosystem, when sort of parties can collaborate together and actually make sort of slightly larger rounds happen off the back of different sorts of tech DD. Jack, I'll just touch on, I guess, a little bit about the venture studio model, because it's a word we plaster around quite a lot, and it certainly is not new, but it's great that we're centered around the heart of Manchester, and we can sort of use the venture studio model to help founders in all different contexts. Do you want to give a little bit of an overview of just what a venture studio is and how we operate specifically?
Sure. I guess a venture studio works across the spectrum of incubator all the way to later stage VC. It's a partnership focused approach. So we're more than just capital. We obviously support founders with capital. We have a tech division that can support from a technical perspective and help kind of build out the MVPs, build out the roadmap, the strategy, and get them in market in consumers' hands. But we also have an advisory arm where team itself has a number of different domain expertise. They've all run and operated and exited many businesses, so got a lot of wisdom and experience that we can share, a lot of stories and support. But also we have a suite or an ecosystem of partners from legal, tax, IP, etc., where we can just parachute in expertise into these founders as and when required. And what that does is it prevents them getting distracted on things that they're not best at and keeps them focused on the things that they're good at. But in terms of the model, where it works really well is the founder can go focus on things at the right time, and rely on us to let them know when they need to, focus on something new, or if they're looking at doing a follow-on investment round, at the right time as a partner, we'll tell them what they need to do, what the key enablers are, and how they need to be ready for that, as opposed to just being, making assumptions on what they need to do and then find out at the wrong time that they've missed something or they've not triggered a key enabler that would have enabled them to get the funding. And it just kind of, it's that extra safety blanket around them that just kind of holds the hand through the process, which is proven. And we've got founders, whether they're spin outs from the universities or they're a bit more mature businesses, but they're seeing the benefits of that in different ways.
Thanks, Jack. I think what we're seeing a lot more of is that founders don't scale on just investment alone. They need the support of various different networks and ecosystems to sort of come together to enable a platform to grow. And that comes to the next point to all of you. How well supported are founders in general here in Manchester specifically, with things like accelerators, mentorships, and academic collaboration? And what programs are actually moving the needle on innovation support?
So MIDAS is sort of a whole concierge support service we think of ourselves as. And I tend to break that down into 3 pillars. The first being scoping the region out. So let's say we meet a founder and a business that's looking to grow in the UK. We will help them make that internal business case for why Greater Manchester. So we'll do that with our data analytics team, who can put together comparisons between our region and, say, Glasgow, another European hub, London, Tallinn, Estonia, Paris, whatever. What's the talent pool like here? What's the cost of hiring, say, X amount of staff in a certain area here? Once we build that internal business case for them, they take it back to whoever they need to. They say, well, okay, we're interested in Manchester. What's next? Bring them in. Mobilization. Okay, you want to go to Manchester? I know, just anecdotally, Ed and Troy, you were in our offices, was it last week, meeting founders from Estonia, funnily enough, talking to them about what you guys offer as co-investors in Greater Manchester. And we bring them in to meet with guys like you and others. So we push them on that sort of conveyor belt towards Manchester. And then once they've decided, yeah, we can get the investment here, we can get the talent here, we can set up somewhere like Dish or Sister, like I mentioned earlier, or just an office space elsewhere, then we'll help them once they've landed in Manchester to grow. So we don't just sort of leave them at the door and say, right, great, you're here in Manchester, off you go. We're here the entire time. So we sort of support people at all stages of landing and growing in Manchester, but we also rely on partners to help where they can as well. So, for example, investment, it's not something we do directly with the companies. We've got great connections with guys like you who can then help at that point. And then introductions into the academic network. Maybe they want to do research, we can help with that. Office space, they need promotion. We'll help with, like I said, marketing Manchester earlier. We'll help them market themselves in Manchester, and we'll help them connect with the right people they need to grow in the city region. So it's a sort of all-encompassing support package that we offer.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I'd I guess I touched on it earlier, but I mean, I think, if you're starting a business, I think it's probably easier than it's ever been to start an AI type business. There's so many tools out there to help with code, and I think what's happening is actually the ecosystem is becoming more and more important, because the journey of starting a company can be much shorter than it used to be. Okay, you get the traditional type businesses where it probably doesn't take as long, but there are a subset of businesses where it is much quicker, and actually you're getting to a point where you need help at a much sooner stage than you used to before. So I think the actual ecosystem, and you're seeing a lot more accelerators, a lot more fund accelerators, a lot more funds getting involved in accelerators where they do provide funding. And that becomes a huge amount of credibility, because then these investors have a stake in a business at a much earlier stage, and therefore, it's a kind of further step on from the accelerator where you might get a bit of office space and you get 6 months, and the investors come in once a week and they tell you how to write a pitch deck and they tell you, you know, who you should be speaking to. Actually, you've got investors being very involved in the business at an early stage and actually providing a huge amount of support. So, you know, as I said, I think it's becoming more and more important that the ecosystem is helping each other, and I think that Manchester's got it working really well at the moment. You know, it's not perfect, nowhere's perfect, but you know, as I said, touched on earlier, the foundations are there to help the businesses as they come through.
Yeah, completely. I mean, we can see that the level of infrastructure and ecosystem, some growth is there to support at all different levels. And we know, I think the most important thing was actually knowing who is part of the ecosystem that we can direct and you know, direct individuals and founders and companies to at their different levels of need. So, I mean, Heather from the Growth Company is a great example of ones that we can sort of direct companies who are a little bit early to help them get to a stage where when they do come back for funding, there is an opportunity there, and the more the people that know about the ecosystem, but also where the ecosystem plays into each other's strengths, we can help the wider investment landscape and more capital inflows into Manchester as a region. We've sort of touched about what's working and what we have as a strength of a city. What do you want to see more of from founders, investors, policymakers to help Manchester stay competitive in the AI space, but tech space in general, not just in the UK, but maybe globally as well?
Say, you know, it would be nice to see public money spread more evenly across cities rather than being concentrated in certain areas or with certain funding providers, just to make kind of democratize access to funding a bit more and give smaller amounts to the newer founders as opposed to putting it into the hands of the businesses that are proven and actually can raise and have got alternative options to raise funding. So it'd be nice to just see at a policy level if the public monies could be spread more evenly and more accessible to early stage founders that actually need it the most.
Yeah, I would say maybe addressing nationally the cost of living would be what I'd like to see, because we have 5 universities in Greater Manchester that are generating around 25,000 graduates each year that work in disciplines adjacent to or using artificial intelligence. Greater Manchester recently, I think it overtook London as the most retention rate for university students over London. If we could address the cost of living, because Manchester used to sort of sell itself on a maybe cheaper version of London. It's not a cheap city anymore. But if we could address that cost of living issue, and then we'd be off to the races in Manchester, because we've got everything that you need here. But we just want to make sure that we can continue to attract the young, the right talent into the city, into the wider regions, but make sure we're not doing, sort of becoming a second London, which if you go on a lot of places, Reddit or whatever, that's what they started to say about Manchester. So want to address that and make sure it's somewhere that these people can stay, come to learn, come to work, and then grow their careers in Greater Manchester.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really difficult question to sort of, what I think everybody could do everything a bit better. From an investor standpoint, it'd be great to see more companies being founded, more companies coming through. That's probably a bit selfish on my part. From a founder perspective, you probably argue that it'd be great investors to be a bit more open to risk and at an earlier stage. I think if you're I think everyone, I sit on panels and I sit on round tables, and inevitably 9 times out of 10, when you talk about Manchester in the north, it always comes back to money. I don't think anybody disagrees that the ecosystem seems to be working quite well. Most people know each other. It's a relatively small ecosystem, even across Liverpool and Leeds and Newcastle and Lancashire. Most people know each other. And people know where they need to go to, and I think it'd be great to see more things coming out of the university. And I know since I've been in Manchester, that is improving and getting much quicker, because there's some fantastic research that goes on, really innovative stuff, and sometimes commercializing that IP doesn't happen, and it can be frustrating, and it can be because you want to see that research because you can see the applications of it. But quite often, a lot of these businesses need a lot of money, at an early stage. And, people argue that London's more open to risk than the north. Okay, that's what it is. We can try, and you can try and ask people, but if it's not going to change, it's not going to change. Whereas Manchester's great is that if you do need people, that capital goes a lot further. It's a lot cheaper to start a business in Manchester. When they work, you can hop on a train down to London. You're going to save a lot more money doing it that way. But yeah, I mean, I think across all aspects we can do better. Otherwise, you just become complacent.
Yeah, thanks, guys. That's really, really interesting. And just before we wrap up, I guess one final quick thought from each of you. If someone is thinking about launching or scaling their company in Manchester, what's your one piece of advice for them to do that in the best way that they can do?
Come and talk to me. Would be the best thing to do.
Yeah, just echoing that. Talk to people. Temperature check your ideas. Find out who's got network. Everyone wants to help each other. There's just not enough people that kind of are aware of people's networks, and it's only when they speak to them and go to these events that they realise actually there's a whole raft of people that can support them.
Yeah, just echo that, but talk to people plural. Don't just talk to one person. Talk to MIDAS, talk to you guys, talk to universities, talk to anybody that will talk to you, and because someone else will tell you that someone else you could speak to. I've met loads of people here today that we can't invest in, but I've pointed them in the direction of someone who might be able to. So talk to as many people as you can, engross yourself in the ecosystem, because someone will be able to help.
We laugh and joke and say that the ecosystem's only 20 people. If you know the 20 people, you've got access to the sort of 200 people off the back of that. So yeah, I echo those comments. But thank you all so much for listening. I mean, does anyone have any questions? Perfect. No, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.